All right, everybody, here we go with part 2 of chapter 1, and we're going to be talking a little bit now about different kinds of communication disorders. Your book talks a little bit about normal communication, communication disorders, and communication differences. Normal communication is really, a broad category of what's average, what's typical, what might be expected. And then if you have a communication disorder, that means that your speech, your language, your hearing, your swallowing is really adversely impacting your life in some way. And then a communication difference is really just, anything that's different from normal or typical, but that really doesn't adversely impact you. So that if you have a difference in dialect, if you're from the South and you're living in New York City, or if you're from New York City and you're living in the South, right, you might have a different dialect than what's considered normal for the culture that you're in, but it's not going to be a communication disorder. Normal communication has great variability. People speak very differently, people use language differently, but, and this is going to be highly influenced by culture, language, geography, economics, religion, ethnicity, race, sexual identity, all different kinds of things. And so the idea of neurotypical, so what's average for your population, what's sort of expected, what's the expected way to think, the expected way to talk, the expected way to use language, is going to be considered quote-unquote normal. With a communication disorder, you have significant difficulty in one or more of formulation, right? So can I take the idea and turn it into language and speech in my head? Transmission, can I actually output that speech? So for me, as someone who stutters, right, I then have difficulty with transmission because I have the idea, I have the language, but I can't actually output it the way I want to. Reception, right? Are you able to receive the information? Are you able to read it? Are you able to hear it? And then comprehension, are you able to understand what you've read or what you've heard? And in order for it to truly be a communication disorder, it must adversely impact the person, either at school, at work, at home, socially, in the community. Right? There must be a negative impact in some way for it to truly be a communication disorder. We kind of talked about what language is already a lot. So language disorders, of course, are just something that impacts one or more of the following: semantics, syntax, morphology, phonology, or pragmatics. It can include kids, adults, reading, speaking, writing, signing, etc. So any one of those areas you could have a disordered language ability in. Speech disorders, there are many kinds of speech disorders. You can have speech sound disorders, so articulation and phonology, where I have, a hard time maybe making an R sound and I make a W for an R instead, or a W for an L instead, or maybe I have a lisp and I have a hard time with my S sounds. Could be examples of articulation. Phonology, maybe I make all the sounds at the front of my mouth and I don't have K's and G's that I'm using in the back of my mouth. Fluency disorders, stuttering and cluttering, are going to be a problem actually outputting speech fluently and clearly, where you might have blocks and prolongations and repetitions, or maybe you talk overly quickly. Could be examples of fluency disorders. Voice disorders is where the quality of your speech, quality of your voicing might be, you could be hoarse, you could be whispered, or there are a lot of different voice disorders that we'll talk about. And there are also motor speech disorders, which is a neurogenic speech disorder, where you might have a hard time moving your tongue or to make and other you might have a hard time moving your tongue and other anatomical structures, your lips, your teeth, in order to make clear speech, or you might have a hard time with the programming and planning of actually how to speak and how to make your sounds. Then there's also hearing disorders, and hearing disorders are broken up into different areas as well. There's sensory neural hearing loss, and this is going to be a difficulty with the inner ear or the auditory nerve. There's going to be conductive hearing loss, which is the outer or middle ear, and that is one where, you know, the outer or middle ear, we can usually, it could be wax buildup in the middle ear, it could be just a deformity of the outer ear. Those can be fixed, quote unquote, fixed more easily than a sensory neural loss. And then we have an auditory processing disorder where the person has difficulty processing speech sounds. So they can hear the speech sounds, but they have a hard time processing and understanding what those sounds actually mean. In our field, we also cover feeding and swallowing disorders. So even though we talk about communication disorders a lot, we also cover feeding and swallowing disorders, usually in the hospital. Hospital speech-language pathologists will work with patients with a hard time feeding and swallowing. We could be working with infants, we could be working with school-age children possibly, and usually very often older adults who have had a stroke or some other kind of neurological incident where they now have a hard time feeding themselves and swallowing without choking on their food. Careers communication disorders. So we're a really big field. We can work almost anywhere, which we'll talk about. Our professional organization for audiologists and speech-language pathologists is ASHA. That's the American Speech-Language Hearing Association. You can check it out at www.asha.org. It's a huge website that covers everything involved in our field. So I definitely suggest you take a look at that. And speech-language pathology. So one avenue, the largest avenue in our field, is to go into speech-language pathology, which is concerned with the study and understanding of human communication and swallowing, their disorders, and the assessment and treatment of those disorders. In order to be a speech-language pathologist, you have to get what we call your C's, which is your Certificate of Clinical Competence. In order to get your C's, you've got to have a master's degree from an accredited program. Usually that's going to be a 5-semester degree. You're going to go fall, spring, summer, fall, spring. At some point towards the end of that program, you take a national certification exam and pass it. And I want to say that we here at Appalachian State University are an accredited master's degree program. Once you have done your master's and have passed your national exam, you'll start your CFY, your clinical fellowship year, working under the supervision of a certified SLP. So for 9 months, you're going to be mentored by a licensed SLP. You'll be paid, you'll have a job, but you'll have somebody who has their C's who will mentor and support you through that first 9 months. ASHA has about 173,000 SLPs. It's actually even larger now, but let's stick with that number for right now. Over half of all speech-language pathologists work in the school system. However, they also work in healthcare facilities, hospitals, rehab facilities, colleges, universities, private practice. So the cool thing about being a speech pathologist is you can work with infants, you can work with kids, you can work with adults, you can work with the elderly, you can work in schools, you can work in hospitals, you can work in rehab facilities, you can work in colleges, you can work in private practice. You can do almost anything with almost any group of people that you want to, which is pretty exciting. Audiology is the other part of our field, which is concerned with the study and understanding of normal and disordered hearing and the rehabilitation of individuals with hearing impairments. You get a CCC in audiology, so your Certificate of Clinical Competency in Audiology. In order to be a certified audiologist and to have your C's, you have to get a doctoral degree, is the entry-level degree for audiologists. A lot of people will get an AUD, which is a 3-year degree. So In speech-language pathology, it's a 2-year degree. In audiology, it's a 3-year degree, or you can go on and get your PhD or your PsyD. And then just like in SLP, you take a national certification exam and pass it, and then you do your CFY for 9 months, your clinical fellowship year, working under the supervision of a certified audiologist. There are about 13,000 audiologists, a little bit more than that. Over 70% of audiologists work in a healthcare facility, hospitals, clinics, doctors' offices, private practices. The remaining 30% work in the school system, industries, and colleges and universities. So just like with SLPs, there are lots of different places you can work and lots of different clients you can have along the way. Last thing I wanted to touch on is that we definitely have a diversity problem in our field. ASHA, speech-language pathologists, and audiologists are about 95% female and 92% white, and we absolutely need a more diverse profession that reflects the diversity of our clients. So if you are a white female, we certainly welcome you into our field and are happy to have you. But we also definitely welcome everybody else as well, because we really need our field to look like the clients who we treat, and right now it does not. So we have some work to do in our field to diversify it and make it as great as the population of our great country, and we're working on that. So I just wanted to add that in, and I believe that is the end of chapter 1. Everybody have a good week, and more soon. Bye-bye.